Have you ever wondered what actually happens when you click a login button on a website? You enter your username and password, click login, and within seconds, you're inside your account. But what's actually happening behind the scenes? That is where backend comes into picture. In this video, I'll explain backend in the simplest way possible, no confusing technical terms, just real understanding. But before we go behind the scenes, let's first understand what backend actually means. Let's keep it simple. Front end is what you see, and backend is what works behind the scenes. Think of it like a restaurant. You see the menu, you place an order. That's front end. But the actual cooking that happens in the kitchen, which you don't see, that kitchen is the backend. Alright, now that you know what backend is, let's see how it actually works in real time. So we have browser, server, and database. Before we go deeper, let's quickly recall what these parts are. The browser is what sends the request and shows the response to the user. The server is where the backend logic runs and processes that request. And database is where all the data is stored and retrieved from. I have already explained browser and server in detail in my previous video named Understanding How Web Works Part 1. So if you want a deeper understanding, you can check that out. For now, let's just keep this simple idea in mind as we follow the flow. Imagine you click the login button. First, the browser sends the HTTP request over the internet. That request reaches the server. Now the backend takes over. Your application code written in C# starts processing the request. It sends a query to the database to check your data. The database processes that request and returns the result back to the server. Based on that result, the backend sends an HTTP response back to your browser. And finally, your front end updates the screen, either showing login successful or invalid credentials. This complete flow from request to response, that's backend in action. Now that you have seen the flow, but what actually makes all of this happen behind the scenes? The answer is key components. There are four main parts working together in every backend system. First, the server. This is where your application runs. As discussed, it's the machine that receives and handles requests. Second, the application. This is your actual code, in our case, written in C#. And this is the language we'll be using throughout this entire series to build our backend. This is where all the logic happens. Third, the database. This is where all your data is stored, like users, passwords, and other details like orders, etc. We'll be using MS SQL as our database throughout this series. And finally, APIs. These act as the bridge between front end and back end. The front end sends requests through APIs and the back end responds through them. Without APIs, there is no communication between what users see and what happens behind the scenes. So now we have understood the technical flow of how the backend works. Let's see how this actually looks in a real situation. Take a look at this. You enter your email and password and click login. Now the backend process starts. First, it receives your data. Then it checks whether the user exists in the database. If the user is found, the next step is to verify the password. Now, based on this verification, if the password is correct, you'll see welcome back. But if the password is wrong, you'll get invalid credentials. And all of this happens in just a few milliseconds. And the important thing to understand here is the user only sees the final result, and all the decision making happens inside the backend. Now that you understand how backend works in real scenarios, let's talk about the tools we'll use to build it. In this series, we'll use C Sharp for backend logic, ASP.NET to build APIs, MS SQL for database, and don't worry, if you don't know any of this yet, we'll learn everything step by step practically. Let's quickly recap what we have learned so far. Frontend is what users see, backend is what works behind the scenes. When you click a button, a request goes to the server, the backend processes it, checks the database, and sends a response back. And all of this is powered by the server, application, APIs, and the database. That's the complete backend flow. Before we start building real backend applications, we need to get comfortable with the language behind it, that is C Sharp. So, in the next video, we'll start from the absolute basics of C Sharp, step by step, in a very practical way. And don't worry if you're a complete beginner, I've got you covered. If you are learning web development and found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Practical Full Stack, because this series will guide you step by step from a beginner to a full stack developer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.